Good afternoon, welcome. My name is Rafael Rodriguez. I'm the Director of Residential Life here at the University of Vermont.
And my name is Terrence Sanders. I'm the Associate Director of Assessment Initiatives from the Department of Residential Life.
I want to welcome folks. This is a fresh day of classes. I want to welcome everybody who's joining us. Students are back. It is a buzz around campus. It's a balmy 1 degree, at least it was when I first checked it this morning. Students are excited. They have brought a lot of life and energy to our campus. We are running into them everywhere. We're happy to see them. It's definitely a sign that the semester has begun. There also is no parking, so we know semester has begun for sure. But we're glad to have our students back on campus. We hope that you enjoyed them while they were at home with you. I think one of the most fascinating parts to see is you spend so much time with the child and they go off for a couple months, and you're in the phase of the time where they come back growing, different, having experienced so much. And it's these moments you get to check in. You see them as they begin to find their voices. Sometimes we wish that they find their voice a little bit less, at least you might. You see them through their successes and their victories, but you also are hearing a lot of their growth that they are experiencing through challenges. So I'm sure you enjoyed your time with them. And we're glad that we have them now for the remainder of the semester. We hope this will be a successful semester for all of them. Perfect. So our goal for today, just to get us all in sync and on the same page, is to do a couple things. We want to make sure we spend some time just going over housing process and student updates. What have we done? What have we changed? We'll spend then the majority of our time focusing on the returner room selection process. And we'll leave, of course, enough time to explain some of the expectations that you can help support your students with, as well as some Q&A. So let's, we have a full agenda. We have about an hour together. I want to make sure we have as much time to get through information that will be most useful and helpful for you and your students. So let's just get right into it. So first, let's share a bit about process updates. As you know, our processes are always student-focused and student-centered. That means that we are constantly changing one piece or another. So here's some things we want to share with you about what we've done so far. First, I want to share that this past semester, we created 16 sessions around the housing process. These are sessions dedicated for students to really think about and work through what they can expect with their returner housing selection process, which is slightly different than the first year process. We, of course, are rooted in our learning community model. That means that our housing process is not necessarily focused on room type and room location, but really focusing on learning and reinforcing relationships. These sessions were meant to help students really understand that and get them prepared for the process. As of today, we have over 1,000 contracts submitted, well over half of what we expect. So that is a great tracking so far. We're excited about that. That means that students are understanding and following the process. A good improvement to our system that I would love to highlight is our timeline. Last year, our housing timeline for returners started in October. Students shared that October is way too early for me to understand whether I enjoy my learning community, have I made solid friends that I would love to live with. And based on their feedback, we made the smart move of shifting it, and the housing selection process started, as you all know, January 4th when our contract opened. And we also have a few new options for returners, which we'll talk about when we get there. Let's start with understanding the bigger picture with respect to our housing returner room selection process. First, some key dates for us to review. Actually, before I get to that, and getting ahead of myself, let's talk about understanding the residency requirement. Who's required to live on campus and who's not required to live on campus. Please know that all of our students have a 4-semester residency requirement. That means that you are here for 4 semesters, not necessarily 2 years. There are certain nuances and circumstances in which the 4 semesters would not count against you. For example, if a student studied abroad, that does not mean they still have 3 additional semesters to complete. The important thing to know about being required to live on campus is any student who has any questions about whether or not they're required, it's very easy to determine that. It's as simple as having our students log into MyResLife, their MyResLife portal. There is a section there titled Housing Residency Requirement. There, it will actually list whether or not they're required to live on campus for next year. It's the simplest process. We are emphasizing, encouraging students to navigate that website and get into that web page to figure out the requirement. The reason we're emphasizing that is because most of the housing process will take place there. So the more you have your students logging in, the more familiar they are with the process and the system and the tool, the less likely it will be that we have any hiccups down the line. So please encourage your students to go and determine whether or not they're required. So everyone who's required, we will have a space for them. We will have a bed for them for next semester. Folks who are currently on campus but are not required, so if you are living on campus right now, you are a sophomore, you have met your residency requirement, you're not required to live on campus next year. If you are still currently on campus and wish to be in housing next year, we will guarantee you a space as well. We will have space offered for those students. So that's some good news. Okay? Now let's spend some time focusing on the housing timeline. Okay. So first, let's talk about our learning community options. We'll try to get the timeline back up in a second. Before we do that, let me just give you all the options for learning communities. Our learning communities options this year include a few for our return students, include a few options. We have arts and creativity, cultural crossroads, wellness environment, sustainability, journey to independence, leadership and social change, outdoor experience, and innovation entrepreneurship. These are the options we are providing for our returner students. Something to note is that traditional housing is an option for our returners. So anyone who's required to live on campus who's not a first year can also select traditional housing. That is still an option for these for our returner students. 2 communities that I really want to focus on is our Journey to Independence learning community. So the Journey to Independence learning community, I talk about students who are not required. It's a bit different. Our Journey to Independence is really focusing on students who have met the residency requirement but really want an experience that is a bit closer to downtown, a bit closer to independent living, and a bit closer to what it's like to be a student living in the real world. So in this hall, we have spent some nice resources to really retrofit the space to contribute to a residential experience that provides and promotes more autonomy. Students here can take part in mentoring and professional career coaching through the Career Center. We bring in resources about how to prepare for life after college, resources around financial management, and preparing for real life skills that they will need as they transition and graduate college. They have a MyServe station, which is a completely self-run, non-staff teaching environment or residential retail option where students are entrusted as adults to manage this space on their own. It's all done, again, unstaffed. Students can go into the space. They can make their own purchases with a checkout using their regular ID cash scratch or their meal points, and they're not charged, or they're not staffed, and it's monitored basically on their work. So that is a fascinating option for students who are looking for an experience. It's not the traditional residential hall experience, but are not quite ready to move off campus, or maybe the off-campus experience for them is not what they're looking for. They want to be closer to resources. This is a great option. This is housing demands, and we have about 125 beds for students to really take part in. The other learning community we highlighted earlier was Cultural Crossroads. And we highlighted Cultural Crossroads for a specific reason. Our return students who are hoping to be a part of this learning community will have to be a part of an enhanced experience. I will come back later and talk more about what that means in terms of being a part of an enhanced experience. Please bear with us as we have transitioned to our slides.
Hold on.
Give you a layout of where learning communities will be. We'll start over by Trinity Campus, where Arts and Creativity will be hosted. As you see, Journey to Independence, it's a bit removed from campus, but still within the residential area, over in what we call still the Trinity part of campus in G-Man's Hall specifically. The wellness environment you'll see has two locations for returner, both Converse and then Christie, Wright, and Patterson. Leadership and social change will be over in Millis Hall. Sustainability for returners will be in New Heights, and the outdoor experience will be Coolidge Redstone Slade, as well as the Wynn Davis Wilkes residence halls. They have grown as a program, and innovation entrepreneurship is still within Mason Simpson Hamilton. We're outlining this because what you will notice is that for most of the learning communities, the second year buildings related to those learning communities, the returner spaces, do shift. So we see that, for example, in returners are not in the new residence hall. They are instead in Converse and Christie Wright Patterson. The same is true for sustainability, where they might have started off in Harris for their return year, but we at South. So it's important to understand where these programs are located. So our room selection process, let's talk about how it works. We have a couple questions that we've received from folks, so we want to make sure that we fold it in to this process. It's important for folks to understand that room selection is assigned based on lottery numbers. So everyone will have an opportunity and a time and a moment to select their rooms. And the lottery number is dependent on the credit hours earned. We always say that versus class year because those are not always one and the same. So a student should be a sophomore, but because of credits, they're not quite there. So we assign lottery numbers based, again, on credit hours. It is a random draw, and it is our best way to ensure as much equity as possible into the process. So we always focus on, again, credit hours earned, which informs the lottery number provided, and that lottery number provided will allow and give the student a time and a block in which they will select a room. We cannot guarantee types of room at that moment. We try to have as much as possible within each time block, some equitable distributions and availabilities of rooms, but there's no guarantee. So what we mean by that is we try not to say, okay, we're going to have all the rooms available for the first block, which means all the singles are taken up. We try to distribute them equitably among rounds of selection, but there is no guarantee around room types. We do honor roommate preferences in a double or triple rooms, meaning if you have another person you want to live with, we will absolutely allow you to preference that roommate in your housing contract, even up to 2 roommates for a triple room. Some folks have asked about that. We want to make sure that, yes, you can select either 1 or 2 roommates to live with. The thing we'd like to highlight, or that's important for us to highlight, is that room type and roommate preferences are 2 separate things, right? So I might have preferred another person or one other person. That does not necessarily mean that I'll be in the double. So we very intentionally try to separate those 2 things so that we can honor as many roommate preferences as possible. Once we link roommate preferences and room type, we have less ability to honor who can live together. So that has been a shift that we made last year, or actually 2 years ago, and it has worked well in our favor. And most folks prefer to live with the person that can choose and are okay if the room type is not completely fixed or controlled with it, or a guarantee. Again, another option is if you know 2 folks who would love to live together, we also do honor triple rooms, roommate preferences. The question is, do returners get priority? I think I addressed that. If the priority is based really on credit hours completed. So the credit hours is what determines the lottery number, and it forms their priority. Yes. It's also important to know that folks returning to the same learning community also have priority. So if you're returning to the same learning community, that is a priority that's given. I'm going to look at some of the questions we've been receiving and see if I can, actually I think I've addressed them all. So one of the questions is, can rising sophomore select a room and be assigned a double, or is there a chance to be in the triple? Yes, again, roommate preference is not guaranteed room type. Next slide. So this is the part we've been looking for, and I introduced a bit earlier, but this is the overall process. So we take a couple steps back. Let's think about our process in totality. The contract opened on January 4th, and that is where students are doing a couple of things. Students are going to sort of sign up for housing. They're going to rank their learning communities. They're also going to preference any roommates they may have, and they'll also indicate any individualized housing needs. For example, are they interested in gender-neutral housing? This all happens in the contract. The contract is the end-all and be-all of the housing selection process. It's important for students to do a couple of things. Some of you who went through this process the first time might be able to, might have experienced a couple of hiccups. So we always are striving to help you all improve the process. Something we ask our students to do is really be clear on ranking as many learning communities as possible. So if someone selects a roommate, well, I'll get to that in a second. If someone selects one learning community 5 times, that is one selection. That means there's a good likelihood that since there are no second selections, you may be placed in a random learning community or traditional housing. So it's very important that folks rank as many learning communities as possible. The second thing to know, because we are linking both learning community and roommate preferences, it's important that each roommate mutually preferences each other and also selects the same learning communities. So those need to match. Both roommates need to preference each other, and they have to be in the same learning community. Oftentimes, and I think I said this during orientation as well, we get into the bump of someone said their preference your son, or your son might have preferenced someone, but it turns out they did not. So folks are looking at us to figure out what did we do, and we have to be the bearers of bad news of maybe they don't want to live with them. Sorry, it's not you, it's me. But that's an uncomfortable place to be in. So make sure that both they preference each other mutually, and that they preference the same learning communities at the same time. The next date is January 22nd. That's the day when we hope or ask that all the contracts be completed by. Also, this is the best day to get your accommodation request in for best considerations. It's important for folks to know that not your student accessibility services housing accommodation does not renew or sort of stick with you for the entirety of your stay. You have to renew that each year. So this is a good opportunity to remind and make sure that the appropriate paperwork is submitted to the student accessibility services to make sure you are set up for your housing selection for next year. By February 4th, we are hoping to make sure that everyone receives their learning community placement. So we can walk through this again, January 4th, contracts open. By the 22nd, we're going to close the contract. That's in a couple of weeks or so. We hope to get back to students with their learning community placement by the 4th. We see that on February 5th through 11th, the enhanced experience applications are open. Now, I talked about this a bit. So enhanced experience are opportunities for students who are in a learning community who want to engage that theme a bit deeper. So I might be in art and creativity, but I want to really focus on a more refreshing, more sort of in-depth experience. That's what our enhanced experiences are about. Most of our learning communities have them. It is up to students to apply to an enhanced experience. Not everyone has to. There is one caveat. If your student is admitted into Cultural Crossroads, which they will know by February 4th, all students in February 4th, admitted to Cultural Crossroads by February 4th, will need to apply for an enhanced experience. All of the returner housing for Cultural Crossroads is enhanced experience only. So your child will need to apply for those. That's the only nuance and caveat for that specific learning community. During March is when we start the room selection process. So if you can imagine the system and how it unfolds, first you sign your contract. That is where you put everything and anything you can think of related to your housing preferences and desires. By the fourth, you get your learning community placement. The next day, for a few days, if you're interested in enhanced experience, or if you're required to do enhanced experience based on where you're at, you fill those out. During March is when you begin to select rooms. At that point, you'd be partnered up or paired up if you had a roommate preference or a triple room preference. You'd be partnered up. You'd be given a time, a lottery number, as we discussed, with a time to go in and select your rooms. If for some reason this process did not play out as you hoped or as you had wished, that's okay. In April, we have again a trading spaces process. The trading spaces is our second chance at trying to get something within the housing process that did not work for you. So if you ended up preferencing a roommate and you're in the same space, and guess what? My roommate will be leaving next semester. This is the time when you are able to address that. I'm going to pause for a sec and see if we have any questions or feedback that's coming in. Anything else? Any questions coming in?
So one of our questions wanted to know, what about a student who's been invited to Honors College as a sophomore but won't know if they've been admitted until after the contract is due? Basically, if they've been invited to Honors College, that means that they will be placed in Honors College unless they decline it.
Yes, so they can still, if they have been invited to Honors College, they'll be placed in Honors College unless they decline that invitation. So I would have them still rank learning communities, put Honors College first, but they'll still be placed unless they decline that offer.
Next question, does Honors College use the same, does returning students in Honors College use the same deadline?
Yes, they do.
Also, Honors College has apartments.
Anything else? Okay. We're going to keep it moving. Well, this is the best time to start exploring if you're not sure where you want to live. So our program directors are in the learning communities, and our students can always go in and connect with them and ask questions. It's also important to connect with other students and see what you're interested in. Some of our students are not quite sure, and they are perfectly okay exploring and being open to exploring what different topics and opportunities might exist. So some students go in prefacing learning communities without really quite being sure exactly where they want to end up, and that's okay. What we can say is at the moment and time in which your student is placed into a specific learning community, they will be attending an open house. So this happens every year. It's kind of the fun part of learning communities. Once you're placed, whether you're new or returning, there's these massive open house events that take place for students to connect. So if you weren't quite sure and you just were that exploratory student who says, you know what, I'm going to be adventurous and pick a learning community I never had an interest in, and now I'm here, what's next? That open house will be an opportunity for them to meet the staff, meet the students who are returning or new to the community. So let's talk a bit about managing expectations and how we work. Our housing inventory is a complex and finite housing inventory. Currently, right now, what we have for returner beds is 2,547. These are the beds set aside for only returners. The reality is that most of us have very individualized and specific needs, and we have a limited capacity to meet them all. So here's how we do this. Here's our attempt. We try to be as transparent as possible to provide as much fairness as possible and as much variability as possible. So we do a couple things. We really focus on honoring the learning that happens in these learning communities by highlighting those and elevating those into the housing contract process. We see the results, we see the outcomes, and we see how students are impacted based on their learning community experience. We also want to honor established relationships by allowing students to room with one or two other people that they really enjoy, that really have learned from or have developed strong relationships with. Those two factors and variables really impact positively a student's residential experience. And at best, that is the most we can do. It becomes a bit difficult when we get into the business of trying to keep entire floors together, entire posses and crews together. That becomes a little bit more difficult for a number of reasons. We have very real constraints. Not to mention we have very competing needs. And in some cases, we also have legal requirements around housing needs of certain populations that have to be protected, right? So when you put all these variables, it makes it very complex. So we try to stick to those at least two expectations and guarantees for students is, as best as possible, give them a learning community that they preference and the roommates that their preference. Anything else becomes very difficult to do. And what we also encourage students to do is really connect with your friends outside of the community that you live in too. So if you end up with someone who's your great friend and you want to room together, perfect. If you don't end up with all 25 folks who you really connected with your first year right next to you, that's great too. That's an opportunity for you to go out and explore. But we want to give students something, knowing that we will not be able to give them everything. Okay.
So we're going to answer some of your questions that are being given through the chat. One of the first questions that we have is, can sophomores live in CCRH's second year if they want?
That's a great question, Pam. They cannot. Students, returners cannot live in CCRH. CCRH is specifically a first-year residence hall for the Wellness Environment Program.
From JDIP, that says, our daughter's current roommate transferred out for spring, so when will new roommates join her?
So that's a this year housing question, which we will take. You stuck that one in, that's fine. The second glitch. Sorry, your mic went out. The second that we identify a need for the space, we will email the student and inform them that a roommate has been identified. They will get the roommate's information. Most likely, they'll even have an opportunity to connect and chat beforehand. All right, let's stick to questions for the process we can for next year.
Okay. If the student is considering semester abroad, spring semester next year, how does this affect their housing in the process?
Perfect. So here's what we do. We ask that the students go through the entire housing selection process, regardless of whether or not they'll go abroad. I think I know your students somewhat. You know them better. We know that what they say they're going to do and what actually happens is two different things, right? So we want them to at least have secured housing. It's not uncommon for folks to go abroad second semester, or sometimes even first semester. What we'll do is we'll make the appropriate changes at that point. If they go abroad first semester, we'll try to hold their assignment for the second, or vice versa. We'll try to make sure that we will hold their fall assignments and then make and open up the space for spring, knowing that they will not be here once we receive confirmation from the appropriate academic colleges that the student will go abroad. So what we say is go through the process.
Do out-of-state students have first pick and choice of housing?
Nope. Our housing, again, is rooted in who's required and who's not required. And then the room selection process is determined based on credit hours earned, not in or out of state status.
And maybe we can go and explain a little bit more the required and non-required. There's a few questions trying to clarify, do they have to live on campus for 2 years?
So the requirement is, again, 4 semesters, and it is a required 4 semesters. There are some situations and scenarios in which that requirement can be waived, but they're very specific. If folks have questions about that, I would direct them to our website, to the section that says moving off campus. It will outline that a lot better. But really, I think to make it as simple as possible, because there are sometimes nuances to whether or not someone's required or not required. The best resource for understanding your requirement to live on campus is the MyRes Life website. You log into the MyRes Life portal, look at the section that says My Housing Requirements, and it will tell you whether or not you're required to live on campus next year.
Is that better? How will we take LGBTQ identity into consideration?
So what we take into consideration is not necessarily just specific identities like race or gender. What we do, race or ethnicity, what we do ask folks to do in their housing contract is to really share whether or not they would like to be considered for gender neutral housing, which sometimes the folks interested in gender neutral housing are folks who are trans identified. Sometimes they're not, and we honor all of that. What we can say is that we do two things. Number one, we have capacity in all of our learning communities to provide resources and facilities that include gender neutral housing, gender neutral restrooms, and access to spaces and restrooms that are more comfortable for some of our gender non-conforming students. So that is available within all of our learning communities. It's not available necessarily in every building, but absolutely in every learning community. We ask folks to check that box if they are interested in gender neutral housing, because it allows us to better know how and where to place them, and allows us to provide students, no matter how they identify, an opportunity to participate in every single learning community that we have on campus. We also work with students individually and also through the PRISM Center. Sometimes we have folks who contact us directly, and we really do a hands-on individualized approach for students who identify as gender nonconforming and or trans identified, to make sure that the housing options that we're providing meets their needs, or to figure out if we need to alter that in any way. Again, sometimes those students reach out to us directly. Sometimes they are connected to us through the PRISM Center.
And I think it's easy. We should explain again just the room selection piece. We keep getting questions on priority given to when they're going to be able to choose. So I think it's to really bang out that it's based on their credit hours earned.
Yes, I can reiterate that. Required students will be asked to, I'm going to run through the entire process. Just to be clear, required students and non-required students who are interested in living on campus will be asked to fill out a housing contract and rank their learning community preference and roommates and any individualized housing needs like gender neutral housing. Once that's done, they receive their learning community placement in early February. After that learning community placement occurs, students will begin to select rooms in March. The way room selection works is that students will be generated a random lottery number based on credit hours, based on the range of numbers. So numbers, let's say 1 through 50 for seniors, will go in a specified time to select a room. Afterward, and then it will follow after that. So numbers, the next numbers, and then we'll fix over, and then we'll fix again, then we will continue to move over to the other classes. So senior status based on credit hours, junior status based on credit hours, so forth and so on. I hope that was clear. I know folks are asking again due to some audio issues that we were having. So I do not mind repeating the information. I know we're trying to do a couple things here. So if questions have to be repeated, please do not feel bad about retyping those up. I promise I will try my best to get to them.
Next question. What happens if their student misses the contract deadline? I got the answer.
Okay.
All right. So if a student misses the contract deadline, our will reach out to those students after room selection has been completed.
Perfect. Any other questions?
If a student is abroad as a sophomore in the spring, are they still required to be on campus for their junior semester?
No, they are not. So the question was, again, if a student is abroad as a sophomore in the spring semester, Are they still required to be on campus for a junior semester? I would say no, but I would say, hey, here's the best part. Go onto My Res Life on the tab, and it will let you know whether or not they're required. Okay, should we keep going with the PowerPoint? All right. So why aren't the pictures online? Perfect. So I think folks were asking about images for the rooms, and here's the reality. We used to have floor plans online, and after consultation with our police services and emergency services staff on campus, it was strongly and highly recommended that we take out any floor plans from our website. And I think in the name of student safety, we were quite comfortable with that. Plus, floor plans are not necessarily accurate. I think what we do have, if folks type uvm.edu/reslife/halls, by the way, we'll make all these links available, they will find an inventory of our residence halls. So they can filter by gender neutral housing is available, learning communities that attach, and this is where they get to inventory, have a better sense of what's within our housing inventory. Our rooms really range from space to space. So even if we were, for example, to provide a square footage of the space, it does not tell you the bulkhead that's sticking out that's gonna make this layout different than the other layout. Or the heater or the closet that is set up in a specific angle that maybe makes this little room setup much different than the one right next door. So our housing inventory is quite unique and broad. They range not only from building to building, sometimes even from floor to floor or within a floor. So it's hard for us because I think sometimes when we set that up there is an expectation that that is exactly the setup they're going to receive. What we are focusing on, and we'll spend some time on, is developing some common setups. So not by building or not, this is the rooms in this specific area, but maybe identify, here's a couple of images for what a typical triple can look like or a typical double space would look like. I think we're leading towards that way. We do not have that information online right now for this year, but we're hoping to have that available for our next housing process. Again, this is always an iterative process of refinement and development. So I appreciate the feedback and the questions. So suite options, configurations, and prices, particularly suite options. I think there was a bit of confusion in the housing contract right now. It asks you, are there any room types you're not interested in? Please know that this is not asking you which room types you are interested in. What it's asking you is, are there any suite types, room types that you're not interested in for the specific reason of there's financial implications. So all of our room types vary based on cost. The traditional room type factored into a financial aid package is a double room. That is typically what we consider the standard cost of room, is that typical double space. Anything above that is more expensive. So what we tell folks is, if for financial reasons you're not interested in anything higher than what we list on the website as that traditional double, please let us know and we will not place you in those space. However, if you are placed in that space because your learning community preference means that you can only be in that type of a space, and you have financial unmet need, we encourage folks, and that's determined by financial aid, we will encourage folks to request or apply for the offset. So Residential Life will offset the difference of the price based on your financial need. So if you are placed, if you said, you know what, I do not want to be in a suite at all, the price is too much, I want to be in a traditional hall, but you get place sustainability, which is only suites, what we will, and you have financial need, we will charge you the traditional double rate and we will offset the cost of that space. That financial offset is not determined by Residential Life. Please know that it is determined by financial aid. Have questions about roommates? Let's talk a bit more about roommates. What if roommate scenarios? I think I had a couple of questions, attached to that. So this is where we get. What happens if students request to be roommates, but one of them is selected to be an RA after the deadline is submitted to request? So this is basically, I selected a roommate, and guess what? We're not going to be roommates for next year for any variety of reasons. My roommates will become an RA, or they're taking a semester off, or they're going abroad. That is where I referenced earlier the trading spaces process can be helpful. If you have two folks mutually sort of choose or select one another, we can try our best to facilitate that room change, and make sure that we do as much as we can as possible to get folks living together. So that trading spaces process is an option there. Next question. Some of these are quite nuanced and complex. So I'm going to say they're very individualized, right? So if we have roommates or questions about how can I keep 8 folks together, I'm going to ask that we take those offline. And also remember what I shared. We're trying to do the best we can with a limited inventory to really ensure learning communities and at least a roommate preference or 2. This is a good question. So for example, in a double, one person has an earlier lottery number. Does this person secure the room for both? Yes. Right? The person with the earliest lottery number, make sure they're on top of it and they get in there as soon as that process opens up, because they can secure the room. And basically what the other person will just do is go in and just confirm that that's the room they're going to be in. And the other person gets automatically pulled in. Apologies for that. We changed that slightly. So if the person with the earlier lottery number gets in and secures that space, the other person is automatically pulled in. So the map of the building is really the resources that we talked about. It's that website we discussed, so they can better see what's in this space. Again, no physical maps for security reasons. We do not provide those. Can they see who else has already signed up for a room? So this is a person who is going in as an individual person, and they want to see if somebody else has been assigned to that space or who that person is. They cannot at this moment. They cannot see that. No. Any other what if roommates? Do they see which ones are singles? Yeah, they do see room types. Room types is something that they are able to see. Absolutely. Okay, someone asked a couple questions. If you want to keep in your learning community, when it's in a learning community that only has suites, are you able to preference more than one person who will be in your suite? No, the suites are united sometimes by a common area or by a restroom. You're choosing for that specific room within that suite, not the full suite. But if folks have good lottery numbers and they're able to make the system work for them and the process work for them, we always encourage that. Do we guarantee it? No. We really are looking at spaces and rooms in the room selection process. They can absolutely see if someone has already signed up for a room, even if they don't know who it is. Correct. They can see that. Okay. Should we keep it moving? So let's talk a bit about individualized housing needs. And there's a couple of areas that I really want to focus on for our time together. Let me see. First, I want to talk about access accommodations. I made the note earlier. I want to emphasize again that if you have specific student accessibility needs, it is important that you submit that by February, I believe 2nd, it was the date submitted, by February 2nd for best consideration. Your accessibility certification is not going to transfer over from one year to the other. You have to get that recertified. So please get all that information in on time. As I mentioned, all of our residence halls do have gender neutral housing options. Sorry, all of our learning communities have gender neutral housing options. Some spaces within all learning communities have been identified to meet the needs of students. So please make sure you indicate that in your housing contract. We also do partner with our Living Well communities to focus and provide the Catamount Recovery Program. That is an option for students who are seeking a college experience, but who are also in recovery. This is a space that has been identified on campus that really provides students with not only just the housing support and needs, but also programmatic and and all the types of needs and support for this population. So the Catamount Recovery Program is an option, as well as we have the Wellness Environment, which is slightly different, but it is substance-free living. The Outdoor Experience Program also has a version of that for their first-time, first-year students. So a reminder, and I'm really glad that folks are typing and sending in such great questions. I think it's going to be amazingly important for you all to be a resource for your students in this process. The more we can collaborate, the more you and I, well, my team and you all, the more us as a family can collaborate to support students the best it is. We really do see this as a learning process. It is a process. Some of our students are better at it than others. I think we all know that. Some of us are better at it than others, but we really want to put students at the center of this process. So please feel free to ask all the supporting questions you will need in order to help your students navigate this process. But we really want to make sure that we focus and are working as much as possible directly with the student. If there are concerns, we talked about the sort of limitations within our housing inventory, but if there are process concerns or clarifications, please feel free to reach out. We will try to respond to those as soon as possible. Again, we're in the middle of a housing selection process for two populations: our first-time, first-year students and our returning students. Overall, that is 5,790 some odd students, plus family members. So we can double, triple that. So we are quite inundated with feedback. What I like to say is 1 email is just as good as 9. So if you can keep those as concise as possible, we will try to get you back, but it makes it a little bit difficult if we are trying to do the best we can to get information through. We are also trying to do the best we can to respond to students as soon as possible, and students first, as they are often the ones navigating the process, and we want to make sure that they know how to find the solutions and web-based answers they need, particularly as they're the ones who have access to the system. We want to make sure that they have the info as clear and as succinct as possible. That's great. So we had a question: how does a student contact someone from Res Life for help with filling out their application if they've got a unique situation? My recommendation is to have the student go in person. Sometimes the nuances of the circumstances are so unique that we can get into lengthy email exchanges that go back and forth about 20 times. So I would say, please, the best way to do this is to come in person. We have folks answering the phones all day long, as well as other staff working the desk to help support and balance our response. So I would recommend go in person, which is not necessarily what our students are most comfortable doing nowadays, but it is the best way to guarantee that they get the response they need. So what happens if a student doesn't get housing at all? Well, if you're required to get housing, we will have a space for you. We will hold that space for you, and we'll track you down until you sign that contract. The bad part is, at that point, what your options are may be much more limited. So we try to make sure the students go through the process. So we have some check stops in between. Again, at the time that the housing contract closes, we really try hard to follow up with those students who have not filled out the contract. If they're required, for sure. So we have a couple of check stops. You're welcome, Pam. Okay, do we have more questions? I answered that one already. Okay, let's keep it going with the PowerPoint. Oh, it's Q&A. There we go. So someone asked, if a student is living off campus but would like to have a limited meal plan, what are the options? Are there any special steps to take to opt out of? Okay, so what we would ask folks to do is contact the meal plan office. Actually, they don't have to contact them over the phone. Their website really lists all the different meal plans that they have. They have what are called commuter plans, and limited plans. So those are what they will be looking for. And they will have all the directions for how to sign up for that. Any other questions that are coming in? Okay, let's go back to. I will note at this point just a special nuance regarding one of the learning communities, the wellness environment, particularly if students are new to the wellness environment, meaning they're not returning, they haven't been a part of it, but they're interested in participating. That learning community does have a course requirement. So if you did not take it in your first year and you're entering the learning community as a sophomore, maybe even a junior, there is an expectation with that specific learning community that they take part in the 3-credit course. And I'm going to emphasize the 3-credit course because as returners, who are most likely have identified a program of study or are getting there, their credit capacity might be a factor. So please keep in mind and help your students keep in mind that if they're a returner hoping to go into WE, but it's their first time living in the wellness environment, they need to figure out and factor in how to make space for that 3-credit course that is required. Does Cat Scratch credit roll over from year to year? Let's work on getting that answer. So although meal plan is not our area of expertise, we can absolutely go ahead and get those answers for you while we wait. The other question is it too late to apply to be an RA? It is absolutely not. If any of you are parents out there who really does enjoy saving money, please encourage your student to be an RA. We're about to open up that that RA selection process very soon. It's a great opportunity for students to be engaged, to really have an impact on the experiences of either first year or returning students. We are really big on keeping students or RAs connected within their established learning communities. This is a great way to be a role model, to learn a lot about your own leadership and how you want to support others. It's also an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of students. And it has some great perks. So again, if folks are interested in having their student become an RA, please encourage them and direct them to our website. There is on the left-hand side, employment link on our UVM webpage. Just as a reminder, from year to year, which was the question, from year to year, Cat Scratch does roll over from year to year. Meal points do not roll over from year to year. Meal points do roll over semester to semester. So if your student had meal points last semester that were unused, they should still have them now. But this is the last semester to use them up. They do not roll over next year. Cat Scratch does. Any questions? Please feel free to send them our way. So someone asked, what are the options for moving from a traditional housing to a learning communities like wellness? Well, again, the housing process gives you that opportunity. So that's just basically, even if they were in traditional last year, this is a opportunity to start again this year and be a part of a learning community. So you do not stay in that community, that type of housing, just because you were. Great question. I'm going to say that I think it's Stephen. Stephen, yeah. Please confirm the lottery applies to room selection, not learning. Yes, the lottery talks about room selection process, not learning communities, right? Learning communities is a different process. So we have folks rank. We try to match as much of their rank and roommate preference as possible, trying to keep those folks together according to their housing selection option. The only priority that happens with respect to learning communities, the community itself, is whether or not you're returning to the same community. So if you're returning to the same community and successfully completed the class, you do have a leg up in returning to that same learning community. Lottery has is explicitly talking about the room selection process? That's a great question. Thank you for asking that one. So JDIP asked, so basically you mean students have to stay on campus for 2 years. That's how most folks conceptualize it. There's a very nuanced and specific reasons in which we say 4 semesters. It doesn't apply for most, but sure, that's the easiest way to understand it, 2 years. We intentionally say 4 semester because we do have some nuances. For example, if students start later, start in the spring, then they still have 4 semesters of residency requirements, not 2 years. If we don't say 4 semesters, they'll say, well, I'm in my 3rd year of college, so I don't have to live on campus. So we tend to say 4 semesters intentionally, but for most folks, that is 2 years. Once you complete your 2-year commitment, are students offered help finding off-campus housing? Yes, our Office for Student and Community Relations really facilitates many opportunities to really understand the housing process, develop skills and awareness and knowledge around how to be a tenant in the Burlington community, how to avoid some of the pitfalls that some of our students experience going off campus. I think going off campus seems really attractive and lucrative to be on your own, and it can bring its own challenges, right? How do you navigate folks backing out of a lease? How do you navigate a tenant or a landlord that is disruptive? So all those resources and workshops are provided by the Office of Student Community Relations, as well as a web page for them to explore what the housing listings are that some of our landlords from the community place on. And again, if students are interested in remaining on campus, we also strongly encourage that. They are connected to many of the resources that they need. It's a great place to be, and if they had an amazing experience for the first 2 years, then we encourage them to continue to do that after their residency requirement is completed. We love to have them on campus as well. All right, folks, I think we are nearing the end of our time together. I hope this process was informative. Housing can be quite the process, and we try to simplify it as much as possible for our students, but also for you to understand. Please know that we will encourage and do encourage more questions to come. If there were questions that were not answered or questions that continue to come in, what we will do is we'll reply to them, and we'll find a way to maybe post responses. We'll find a way to post responses either to one of our Facebook group pages or to this link itself. So we'll continue to take those questions, answer them, and get the info to you. Thank you all for being great partners. We are, again, excited to have students back on campus and excited to continue to work with you. And we're looking for hopefully a smooth housing selection process. Students are in their 2nd semester. I hope they all did well academically in their 1st semester. As we know, housing is a part of the experience, but we want to make sure that this is only a part and not what's going to take over the entire spring semester. They have quite a bit on their plate. Classes do get more difficult this semester. They continue to progressively get difficult as time passes, and we want students focused on the right things, which are their academics, and successfully completing what should be a quick and painless process. So thank you for your support, and have a great day.